what I wanted to talk about tonight was what's been going on in Russia over the last couple of months and what it portends for the future. Because the demonstrators can really be divided into a number of different groups. One group is the communists, and those people who support the communists. Now, the communists have been continuing demonstrators. They often hold demonstrations. They're relatively small. Sometimes they're in the centre of the city, sometimes they're not. But they are seen as being one of the groups that demonstrate. The second group is the nationalists. And the nationalists, and that term covers a broad range of groups, from extreme sort of neo-Nazi groups all the way through to more moderate nationalist groups. And the nationalists too have often been seen to be conducting small demonstrations. But it's the third group which makes these demonstrations unusual. And that group is essentially the urban middle class. What we've seen in the demonstrations on those 3 dates that I mentioned has been a leading role taken by members of the urban middle class. This is unusual because this is the group which by and large one can say has gained many benefits under Putin. So it's unusual because of the composition of the demonstrators, and particularly the involvement of this urban middle class. Now, the demands that the demonstrators are making also make this unusual. Basically, there are 4 demands that the demonstrators have been bringing forward. The first is for a rerun of the election. The election for the State Duma, that is the lower house of the Parliament, was held on the 4th of December, and that election was seen by many people to be fraudulent. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment too. But the first demand that they're making is for a rerun of the election. We want a fair election. We don't want a fraudulent election. The second demand is that the head of the Central Electoral Commission, that is the person in charge of running the election, should be sacked. The third demand is for the release of political prisoners. It's a demand which doesn't sit easily with the other 3 demands actually, but for the release of political prisoners. And the fourth demand is for what, for want of a better term, can be called liberal reforms, or liberalisation of the political system. Now they're the demands that are being put forward, and yet the slogan under which the demonstrations seem increasingly to be taking place can be summarised in what you can see on the banners that many people hold: Russia without Putin. I would like to suggest that the demonstrations will have very little effect in the short term, and particularly on the presidential election. Why? 4 reasons. First, Putin remains the most popular politician in the country. All of the polls suggest that he is by far the most popular politician. It's true that his support seems to have dropped below 50%, but it's still streets ahead of the Senate guy. In a poll that was taken in December of last year, so it's after the demonstrations began, 45% said that they would vote for Putin, and his nearest opponent, the communist leader Zyuganov, was going to get 11%. The second point is that the opposition is unable to come up with a credible leader. This has been the problem all along in Russia since 1991, that no opposition group has been able to put forward a leader which has been able to generate widespread support. And certainly at this stage, the demonstrators don't appear to be able to do that. There is nobody who's being pushed forward that looks as though they're going to have the national stature to be able to carry off any sort of challenge. I mean, if we look at the 5 people who are standing for election for the presidency, if the argument is the political system is bad and needs changing, 4 of the people standing are old politicians, if you like, and members of that system. And therefore, if the system's bad, presumably they're bad as well. The 5th guy, Prof, is a billionaire businessman. Now, billionaire businessmen are not very popular in Russia. And so, none of these people are clearly going to be able to match it with Putin. Third, the opposition is very small. The opposition is very small. If we take the largest estimate of the anti-Putin rally of 120 odd people, that's around about 1% of Moscow's population. We are not talking of a city rising up. It's much smaller elsewhere. The demonstration on Saturday, at which there was this between 80 and 120,000 in Moscow. The figure that's given for St. Petersburg is 5,000. St. Petersburg is the 2nd biggest city, sophisticated city, a politically sophisticated city. So the numbers outside of Moscow are very, very small. So the demonstrators constitute a very small part of the population. They have no organisation at this stage to sustain their protest or to maintain it across the country. Certainly you've had these groups growing up like the League of Voters, and Putin has said, yes, I'll talk to the League of Voters. We don't know who the League of Voters is, we don't know what sort of political clout they have, but clearly they're not very big. And this is a real problem if what you're going to do is to try to sustain popular mobilisation for change. You've got to have an organisation of some sort. Fourthly, there is no real program here. The program is just about, let's change what we've got, not about what are we going to have after it. And as soon as they begin to talk about what are we going to have after it, this is where the problems are going to come out. If you've got an opposition group which consists of the communists, the nationalists, and sort of the middle class, there aren't too many grounds that they would come together on. The communists and the nationalists might, but it's not clear that the middle class would. So there is a diffuse program which is unlikely to be able to mobilise widespread numbers, I think. So in the short term, I think there's not much chance of a great deal of change. Of course, the issue is the longer term. And it may be, some people have sort of started to argue this, it may be that this is the beginning of the cracking of the foundations of the Putin system, in the sense that this may be the emperor has no clothes moment. This may be the time when people have finally said the system is wrong, it needs to be changed. And these are not the people who were always getting dismissed, the liberals, the people who now have almost no part to play in the political system. It's a more substantial group. So it may be that what this does is that it creates a sort of a sense that the system needs to change. It may be that Putin accepts that there is a need for change. It's interesting if you read Putin's speeches. Putin insists that what Russia needs is democracy. Democracy of a certain sort. It's a Russian-style democracy, but it's democracy. Now, he claims that's what they've got, but it may be that he sees that the only way in which the system can be stabilised, if these protests continue, is to move down a more liberalising path. It's possible. I think it's not very likely, but it's possible. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.